Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm Irene and today I'm going to be sharing information on Reach Falls. So Reach Falls is in Port Antonio, and actually we try to stay a few days in Port Antonio just because there's so much to see and do around this area. And so for Reach Falls, it's, I would say, around 40 minutes. Obviously, it depends on where in Port Antonio you're going to be staying. So where we were staying, it was just outside of the little city area, and it took us about 40 minutes to drive. And I do have another video on using your cell phone there, which also, if you get a cell phone and a SIM card, it will allow you to use the navigation on your cell phone, and so that will allow you to find Reach Falls a little bit easier. It is a little bit off the beaten path, I would say, and so I wouldn't really recommend relying on a map to get there, just because generally I have used maps in the past, but in the more rural parts of Jamaica, there aren't always street signs, and so it makes it really difficult to use a map for that reason. So you definitely want to have a GPS or map app on your phone that you are using in order to find this place if you are driving yourself. Now, if you are part of an excursion or you have a driver, then you don't have to worry about that, but those are generally more expensive than just driving yourself. And I will be uploading a video on driving in the near future, so I will give some more details on what to expect if you do drive yourself, so just watch out for that. And so if you are driving yourself, or however you choose to get there, once you're there, then you will expect to pay around $10 a person. They do have a little parking area. There's not tons and tons of parking, but we didn't really have a problem finding a parking spot, and I think probably because it is off the beaten path that most people choose to go as part of an excursion, because there were a couple of busloads of people that happened to get there just before we arrived. And so anyway, we didn't have a problem finding a parking spot. There are a few signs that people are holding along the way that, let's see, how do you want to say, that do advertise, I guess, that they will be your guide if you want to, I guess, stop and pick them up and pay them. We didn't do that. We just went ahead and went to Reach Falls, and we paid the entry fee, and then there is a little incline to get down to the actual falls. And one thing to know about this area is that it was used in the movie Cocktail, and so for the people that we were taking with us, I mentioned that, and they were too young to remember the movie, and so that didn't make any difference to them on whether or not they wanted to see this falls. So if you are with people that have actually seen that movie or are old enough to have seen that movie, then they might care about that. Younger people apparently don't care about that. So anyway, it was used in that movie, and I don't think that movie or other pictures that I've seen online really do it justice, and I will insert some pictures along the way in this video just to give you some other detail that you can associate with this. Of course, we have the iconic, main waterfall that everybody has seen online and in the movie that you can refer to. But outside of that, there is this whole other part of the river that you can explore, and that has beautiful clear water. I mean, you can look through the water as if you were looking through glass. It's gorgeous. It is a little bit on the cool side, but your body acclimates to it pretty quickly. And if you happen to be there when it is one of the warmer times of year, then you will find it very refreshing. And so, I mean, for me, once I got into the water, I didn't even notice that it was a little bit cooler. So anyway, when you get down to the falls, because, okay, just to back up for a minute. So I mentioned that we parked. There's a little bit of an incline to get down to the falls. There's kind of a flat area that does have a little place that you can order food from, which is great, and we definitely ordered food from there when we were done with the climb. So I'll mention that again in a minute. And then there are some stairs that take you down to the area that is actually like the falls and the water. And it is pretty shallow in some parts, so if you have smaller children, then there is an area that they can just splash around in, which is fine. It does get deep in some areas, but they have that roped off so that you can clearly tell which section gets a little bit deeper from the section that's more shallow. And they do have lifeguards there. And what I really loved about it is that the part that the water that comes over the rock that makes the falls, there is a bit of a cave that when you go behind the falls you can get into, and it is very narrow, so it's like one person, well, probably like 2 or 3 people could fit in that little narrow area or cave behind the water, which is really fun. And then you climb out back behind the area, so you go in the front and then you climb out a different area, and then you can climb back down to the water that you were swimming in, or you can climb up to go up the river. Well, a couple things to note here. One is that depending on the time of year you go, and I don't know if it's really dependent on the time of year as much as it depends on how wet the rainy season was. So when we went there earlier this year, it happened to have been just after a very wet rainy season, and so the water was rushing pretty good, and the water was coming down off the rock at a pretty good rate, and so you could really feel the impact of the water that was coming off the rocks. So I mean, it wasn't dangerous or anything, but it definitely can kind of get you off balance when you're climbing out of that waterfall area. So you definitely want to have water shoes for this waterfall, and you can, I mean, hypothetically you can choose either water socks or water shoes. I would really recommend water shoes for this waterfall, just because if you decide to walk back anywhere that's not this little area that I've described, if you walk up the river, I don't know if there's really a way to walk down the river, because I only saw one person walking down the river. Most people were walking up the river. And so if you do that, there are pretty jagged rocks on the sides of the river that you're going to be walking, and I was using water shoes when I was walking, and I could definitely feel how jagged the rocks were through the water socks that I was wearing. And so if you have water shoes, which is what everybody else that I was with was using, they didn't notice the jagged rocks as much as I did. And so it was a bit more comfortable for them to walk up the river. And so anyway, just keep that in mind. There are jagged rocks, so I would really recommend water shoes versus water socks in that case. And so I did mention that there are some lifeguards, and when we were there were 2 lifeguards that were taking turns watching the area. And then while one was watching the area, the other one was taking people up the river. And there were at least a couple of signs that said that you must have a guide with you in order to go up the river. So like I said, along the way, there were people advertising that they would be your guide. And I don't know if it's really an option to not have a guide, just because there were at least a couple of signs that said you must have a guide with you in this area. So I wouldn't, really chance opting not to have one just because there were those signs. So anyway, we waited for one of the lifeguards, and they took us up the river with some other people that were waiting. And they did allow you some time to swim around, because there are areas that you can just swim in if you want to. And the water is, like I said, very clear and beautiful. And actually the guide was drinking some of the water, so I'm guessing it's very clean water that you can also drink. We didn't drink any, but the guide was. And then there also was an area that you could jump into that then was like a cave. Once you jumped into it, then there was like a air pocket that you could, easily breathe and kind of tread water, and then come out a different area than the area that you jumped into. And so I will insert that video that we took when we were there, just to give you an idea of what it's like. Some people were really scared about this and were concerned about jumping in, but I assure you it was fine. You do need to know how to tread water though, because I couldn't feel the ground underneath me, so it wasn't like you could jump in and then stand. I don't know exactly how deep it was, but you definitely need to know how to tread water just in case. It's not a very big area. There were about, I think, 3 or 4 of us at one point, and it wasn't very crowded. I mean, there was still space, and there are rocks that you can hold on to. So for instance, my husband doesn't swim very well, and so he jumped in and was able to grab onto one of the rocks after he jumped in, and he was perfectly fine, and then was able to come out the other end where you come out, and he was fine. So I don't think that you really have much to worry about there. And it's optional. The guide allows people that want to jump in to jump in. I asked him to jump in first, because originally he was just telling us, okay, just jump in and then climb out the other side. But I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, so I asked him to jump in first, which he did, and then he just stayed there while people that wanted to jump in jumped in. And then after everybody was done, then he allowed people to stay and swim around. We chose to just walk out with him, because at that point, we had already swam around a bit at the beginning and as we were getting up to that point, and so we were already kind of a bit tired, so we just left with him. But you can really stay, I think, as much as you want there, And then just keep in mind that anytime you have a guide, regardless if it's one of these waterfalls that I've mentioned in this video or different videos, or like the house tours, anything that you have a guide for, you will want to tip them. And so at the end you give your tip, and then after that we went to that little area that I mentioned at the beginning where you could get food. And so we had worked up quite an appetite at this point, and so we stopped and got some food. They had at least a couple of food choices. I think it was brown stew chicken and jerk chicken. They might have actually even had like a steamed fish option. I'm not completely sure about that. I know they had at least 2 options, and you get a pretty good portion. It's usually the rice and beans. They refer to them as rice and peas, and then either the jerk chicken or the brown stew chicken. And we paid $4 US for a plate, and like I said, it's a very good portion. We definitely got full on what we ate. It was delicious. I love Jamaican food anyway. And I also have another video on best Jamaican food. So if you want more tips on Jamaican food, please check out that video. But $4 US, you can't really beat that. And just something to keep in mind, our experience was that that was a pretty typical price for the mom and pops that we stopped in for food, whether it be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. When we stopped into those smaller restaurants, that's really about what we paid, $4 a plate, and we got pretty good portions each time. And I don't remember not getting good food at any of the places. So anyway, I think that's probably a little bit subjective just because I already like Jamaican food. So that's probably my bias. But just know that you will have at least a food option there. They did have some drinks as well that I think were around a couple of dollars for a drink. So not bad at all. It really made for a really good afternoon. We enjoyed it quite a bit. And actually, I hate to say, but it really made me reconsider my favorite excursion being Dunn's River Falls. For a little while there, at least a few days, I was really thinking that Reach Falls was going to be my new favorite excursion in Jamaica. So that was obviously before we had gone back to Dunn's River Falls, and so once I had been back there, then I was thinking, okay, no, Dunn's River Falls, that's still my favorite, but it might be a tie, I'm not sure. So the jury's still out on that. But I would say if you have the opportunity to visit Reach Falls, definitely take it. If you have the opportunity to stay a few days in Port Antonio, definitely take it. Like I said, I think I've said this in at least a couple of videos, there is so much to see in Port Antonio. It is one of my most favorite, if not my most favorite place to visit on the island. I think I'm gonna have to stay there probably every single time. I don't know. But at least devote a few days, just because it does take a little bit of time to get there. I think from Montego Bay it took around 3.5 to 4 hours. I'm not completely sure on that just because we did stop for lunch, so it might have taken us a little bit more time just because of that, or actually it definitely did take us more time because of that. So I'm not exactly sure, you know, if somebody were driving straight through from Montego Bay Airport straight to Port Antonio, about how much time it would take. But I would still expect around 3.5 hours at least to get there. And then from Port Antonio, an additional 40 minutes to Reach Falls. So if you plan on going to Reach Falls, you should really be planning on either doing that from either Ocho Rios or Port Antonio. I can't imagine that you would be able to do that in one day trip from anywhere else on the island, actually. So anyway, if you get the opportunity, highly recommend it. If you have been to Reach Falls and there is something that I have forgotten that you think that other travelers should know, please mention that in the comments to help others. And I think that's about it. Please like and subscribe and tune in for other videos. Thanks so much.